So good morning if you have just joined us, and welcome to the Power of Giving feedback webinar, which myself and Rich are going to look after you for the next hour. So before we get started, let's just look at some housekeeping. So you will have noticed already, if you are trying to turn your camera on, then please don't worry. You won't be able to turn your camera or a mic on with it being a webinar. But that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. So we are going to use the chat function today. So what I would suggest, if you could have your chat box open, just so that we can see what you're typing and you can see what everyone else is contributing as well. Lots of people still coming in, so in the background, I'll just let people come on board. And there will be a few poll questions, as Rich mentioned already, which just to get your feedback as well, as we are doing a feedback webinar, just to see where the knowledge is and what you're looking to get out of today as well. So let's have a look at what we're going to be looking at for the next hour then. So effective feedback, what is effective feedback? Have you been given effective feedback? What's your experience? Then we'll look in a little bit more detail at those common mistakes. Now, I'm sure you've all been there, either on the receiving end or possibly given that feedback as well. It's easy to make mistakes, but hopefully today we'll go through what you can do and give you some handy models that will help with the AID model. And then we'll look at more detail as well, how to receive feedback, because it depends what position you're in. You might be in a position where you're getting that feedback, but what I would do is encourage you to give and receive that feedback to create that culture, because really that's the key thing you want to think about. So before we get started, what I'd like you to do is just start to really think about what areas are you going to be giving feedback? Are you going to be receiving feedback, or are you going to be delivering feedback? And just really keep that at the back of your mind as we go through the session today. So Rich, do you want to take over then and go through understanding feedback for me?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can. And I thought what we do is start with a poll. So the first poll I would like to deliver is, are you good at giving feedback? So Arlene, I don't know if you could pop a poll up on the screen
My
for
poll
them.
doesn't seem to be activating. You want to try your end?
Let's have a look.
It's saying it's inactive for some reason.
Okay, so there's two polls that I want you to have a look at. And there's two hopefully easy questions to bed us into this session. And it's, are you good at giving feedback? And are you good at receiving feedback? This is anonymous. So please be honest and reflect on it as well. Reflect on how you react when you have to give feedback, how you react when you receive feedback. And let's give you a short while to reflect on that. And hopefully that's also going to help with aligning what you'd like to get from today's session. What is it that you want? And hopefully today will be framed around some of those expectations. So I'll allow it to go for another 20 seconds. So for those that have just joined, welcome. We've got a question up there, which is, are you good at giving feedback? But then, are you good at receiving feedback? Now, it's quite nice to see. I'll give another few more moments and then I'll publish the poll as well. And yeah, for those that just joined, type in where you're calling from in the chat. We want to make it as interactive as possible. For those that know People Unboxed, we like to keep it quite casual, quite informal, quite conversational, and we're going to be using the chat to do that. So yeah, do get involved with the chat. That's absolutely crucial. So let's have a look at the results. Well, it's quite nice to see, actually. The majority of you saying that you're good at both giving and receiving. So I guess you're here just to top up on the skills, the assets that you already have when it comes to giving and receiving feedback, sharpen those tools that hopefully you've got in your toolbox, but then also to maybe look at some new ways to be able to deal with it. I mean, it's quite good to see that a small percentage saying no, whereas it's quite a big percentage for both saying not sure when it comes to giving and receiving. Now, what I want to do is I'd like to first off look at some of the common barriers when it comes to feedback, because it's easier to overcome barriers if we understand and accept the ones which are there. So we're going to turn to the chat. We're going to use the chat here, and I'd love to know what gets in the way of giving and receiving feedback. Type into the chat, reflect on what gets in the way. What's a barrier to giving and receiving feedback? So type into the chat and we'll call out as many answers as possible. Ranwar, great one to kick us off with. Yeah, ego. Certainly is ego. And we're going to look a little bit around why that is the case. Yeah, Joe, workload, and I presume putting meaning onto your point, workload means that we just don't have the time necessarily to give effective feedback or receive it as well. Just keep our head down and keep going. Yeah, environment, says Rachel. I think that's quite an important point as well, especially if we're in a loud hustle bustle place for one, but then also working remotely as well makes it a lot more challenging. Let's pick out a couple of other ones. Yes, stress, the way people react. Yeah, if you give feedback, people can often react.
Seems to be a common one, Rich, how people are often worried about people's feelings as well. But again, I think that links in with what Antonia's saying about that lack of empathy as well.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess that's why a relationship is so important when giving feedback. So having that rapport can certainly help as well. Yeah, lots of answers on there. I'm just going to read out yours as a final one. Not knowing their personality profile and how they would like to receive the feedback. Yeah, so not knowing how they operate, how best to flex your approach. So yeah, there's a lot of different answers in there and some good answers to start us off with the session. So thank you for sharing that. Let's reveal some of the common barriers that we come across, such as the fear of offending someone that we've come up, the assumption and bias that gets in the way as well. You have to think about that, and we do pieces around that cultural intelligence as well. The time constraints, which often is that workload, the lack of confidence or knowledge on how to do that. We often sandwich that negative feedback in, and we're going to look at that as a mistake later on, and maybe finding that balance between it being too personal or very impersonal. So here's some of the barriers. We've also got a lot more in the chat, so thank you for sharing that. More of the same, please, team. So we're going to look now at a mindset that we want to encourage to both give and receive feedback, and that is all around a growth mindset. Now, the flip side of that is a fixed mindset. So let's have a look at that first. Hopefully, many of us are common with it, but for those that aren't, people with a fixed mindset see their intelligence and their personality as static features. Okay, so constructive feedback is therefore taken personally, and it can elicit that emotional response, which is never going to look towards development, seek feedback, etc. We're happy with who we are. Whereas a growth mindset, which is where we want to move ourselves towards, if we do struggle with feedback, views intelligence and talents as a quality that can be developed over time. So what that means is that hopefully a growth mindset is going to be recognizing that setbacks and constructive feedback is part of the learning process. And that allows people to bounce back stronger, understand how to do something better. And this kind of mindset sees that those failings as temporary. And actually there's a bigger picture and a bigger thing at play here. So we're looking for a growth mindset, and that's crucial for learning, it's crucial for motivation, and it's crucial for performance. So if we just bring up on the slide a few examples of the difference between fixed and growth mindset, then what we can see, particularly if we look at the criticism, a fixed mindset would say, when people give me feedback, it feels like criticism, it feels like they're attacking me, I don't want it, I won't seek it, I don't need it. Whereas a growth mindset, we're actively seeking that feedback. We want them to come to us and say, hey, do you mind if I give you a couple of pointers? We're actively seeking that, because that's what helping us to learn and therefore grow. So take a moment. Think back to when you received feedback or you gave feedback. Did you and or the receiver have a growth mindset? Because when it comes to feedback, by moving to that growth mindset, we're already seeing feedback as a gift. And hopefully many of us have come across that expression before. Feedback is a gift, and it can unlock both ours and others' potentials. And good news, we've designed the offering for 2024, and the first of our webinar series, the free webinar series, which is what you're on right now, is around developing a growth mindset. More to come on that towards the end of the session and how to book onto it, and that will be with Arlene and also Westy. Now, so Arlene, do you want to now talk us through what makes effective feedback?
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, so I think our mindset, as we've already seen, really is key to that feedback. So what we want to start to explore is what else does go into making effective feedback. But before we look at that effective feedback, let's just take some time and reflect on when you have given or received it in the past, as we've started to do. So what I'd like you to do is to ask yourself these questions. So how was that feedback taken? Was it defensive? Was it taken personally? Or possibly you maybe misunderstood it? Or did you take it openly and really take it on board and use that growth mindset to make a difference? So the next question is, was it effective? Now, what made it effective or what made it ineffective? So I'm just going to give you a minute just to kind of gather your thoughts before we move on. Great to see that you're sharing the feedback as well, which I think is ultimately the aim of this session as well. And I think I'm getting my answers here already. It's like, you know, the content that comes next, which is fantastic. So thank you very much, Zena and Janan. So let's take a deeper dive into what actually makes that feedback effective then. So I think Rich started off with talking about how it's a gift. So what I'd like you to do in the chat, now I know some of you have started to do that already, but what makes that effective feedback? Pop in the chat for me and let me know what makes that effective feedback. I like that positive mindset as well. Yeah, because you could have a growth mindset, but I think putting them both together really does make a difference. And being supportive, absolutely. How are you going to help that person grow and progress? And I think that's the key. Yeah, being constructive. What do I actually need to change? What do I need to do? I like that, Eddie, short and clear. Then you can actually make a difference and know what you want to change. Communication style, yeah. Shouldn't be subjective. Yeah, it needs to be very clear and specific and doable, Christelle. Actually, absolutely. Then, as Bethan said, that clarity, yeah, clear and honest, lots of different things. So I think, yeah, absolutely, it needs to be timely. We want to think about what behaviours we want to change, so focusing on those behaviours rather than focusing on that person and that person's personality, because I think that is key. Be really clear and make it easy to understand. I like that, Heba. Clear and honest. Focus on the future. Don't focus on the past. Because I think sometimes we get too hung on what happened in the past. What are we going to do future-wise? What do we need to change? What do we need to focus on? And that can either be motivational or it can be development. It can be two different things. Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. Making sure that feedback's given as soon as possible. Don't wait till the end of year, performance reviews or 6 months. Really think about how you can do it as soon as possible. And then just finishing off with Samar there. Yeah, find that common ground. How do we work together to move forward? Because it is all about creating those solutions. Now, most of us could be better at giving and receiving feedback, and we will explore both of these areas throughout the session. Now, I want to show you a short video that really looks at how we can improve the way that we do deliver feedback. Oops.
If you look at like a carpenter, they have a toolbox. A dentist, they have their drills. In our era and the type of work most of us are doing, the tool we most need is actually centered around being able to give and receive feedback well. Humans have been talking about feedback for centuries. In fact, Confucius, way back in 500 BC, talked about how important it is to be able to say difficult messages well. But to be honest, we're still pretty bad at it. In fact, a recent Gallup survey found that only 26% of employees strongly agree that the feedback they get actually improves their work. Those numbers are pretty dismal. So what's going on? The way that most people give their feedback actually isn't brain friendly. People fall into one of two camps. Either they're of the camp that is very indirect and soft, and the brain doesn't even recognize that feedback is being given, or it's just simply confused. Or they fall into the other camp of being too direct. And with that, it tips the other person into the land of being defensive. And there's this part of the brain called the amygdala, and it's scanning at all times to figure out whether the message has a social threat attached to it. With that, we'll move forward in defensiveness, or we'll move backwards in retreat. And what happens is the feedback giver then starts to dysregulate as well. They add more ums and ahs and justifications, and the whole thing gets wonky really fast. It doesn't have to be this way. I and my team have spent many years going into different companies and asking who here is a great feedback giver. Anybody who's named again and again, we actually bring into our labs to see what they're doing differently. And what we find is that there's a 4-part formula that you can use to say any difficult message well. Okay, are you ready for it? Here we go. The first part of the formula is what we call the micro yes. Great feedback givers begin their feedback by asking a question that is short but important. It lets the brain know that feedback is actually coming. It would be something, for example, like, do you have 5 minutes to talk about how that last conversation went? Or I have some ideas for how we can improve things. Can I share them with you? This micro yes question does two things for you. First of all, it's going to be a pacing tool. It lets the other person know that feedback is about to be given. And the second thing it does is it creates a moment of buy-in. I can say yes or no to that yes or no question. And with that, I get a feeling of autonomy. The second part of the feedback formula is going to be giving your data point. Here you should name specifically what you saw or heard and cut out any words that aren't objective. There's a concept we call blur words. A blur word is something that can mean different things to different people. Blur words are things that are not specific. So for example, if I say, you shouldn't be so defensive, or you could be more proactive. What we see great feedback givers doing differently is they'll convert their blur words into actual data points. So for example, instead of saying, you know, you aren't reliable, we would say, you said you'd get that email to me by 11, and I still don't have it yet. Specificity is also important when it comes to positive feedback. And the reason for that is that we want to be able to specify exactly what we want the other person to increase or diminish. And if we stick with blur words, they actually won't have any clue particularly what to do going forward to keep repeating that behavior. The third part of the feedback formula is the impact statement. Here you name exactly how that data point impacted you. So for example, I might say, because I didn't get the message, I was blocked on my work and couldn't move forward. Or, I really liked how you added those stories because it helped me grasp the concepts faster. It gives you a sense of purpose and meaning and logic between the points, which is something the brain really craves. The fourth part of the feedback formula is a question. Great feedback givers wrap their feedback message with a question. They'll ask something like, well, how do you see it? Or, this is what I'm thinking we should do. But what are your thoughts on it? What it does is it creates commitment rather than just compliance. It makes the conversation no longer be a monologue, but rather becomes a joint problem-solving situation. But there's one last thing. Great feedback givers not only can say messages well, but also they ask for feedback regularly. In fact, our research on perceived leadership shows that you shouldn't wait for feedback to be given to you, what we call push feedback, but rather you should actively ask for feedback, what we call pulling feedback. Pulling feedback establishes you as a continual learner and puts the power in your hands. The most challenging situations are actually the ones that call for the most skillful feedback. But it doesn't have to be hard. Now that you know this 4-part formula, you can mix and match it to make it work for any difficult conversation.
So I hope you found that video useful. I will share with you in the chat the link for the video before we finish up as well. So it would be good to hear your thoughts as I just described. So I'll just do a quick kind of overview of the 4-part formula. So as you've seen from the video, you can use this to help you feel more comfortable in giving that feedback and really being open to receiving feedback as well. Now, setting it up well is really key, and making feedback part of your expectations, whether it be if you're doing a project or you're doing some work collaborating together or just day to day. And really think back to earlier when we really discussed giving and receiving that feedback. So before you begin, really think about when should we give each other feedback, or as a manager, make it known in one-to-ones if you have them, making that time for giving feedback as well. But really role model it by asking for feedback yourself, because at the end of the day, we want to keep learning and growing as well. Now, some considerations I think are key when it comes to giving and receiving feedback. So really think about where and when and how we give that feedback. So timing in regards to this, that's really the most helpful. I think it was Sarah that said in the chat, trying to give it as earlier, as soon as possible. It really does enable that person to learn from any mistakes. And it really reinforces as well if they were right and why they were right and what they did. So try and set some time aside really to give that as quick as possible. Also, just make sure it is appropriate and it is private. So thinking about that location really does come into play. So is it a safe place? Does that person feel comfortable? Now, it can be a challenge, I think Rich spoke about already, when we give that feedback. So it's really thinking about, are you doing it virtually? So having cameras on, being able to see that person and read that other person's body language really does make a huge difference. And I can only talk from personal experience working remotely, and Rich and myself, different locations, but I still feel that we can do that successfully. Now, make it constructive as well. So really be clear, stick to the facts, speak in the first person. What could that person focus on? What could that person really improve at? Or what are they good at? Show that support. We really want to look at how we build that trust. So make it two-way. Think about how we can give both that positive and developmental feedback. Being aware of your own body language. I think we spoke quite early on about emotional intelligence, understanding other people. And I think it really is key to think about, what's your tone like? What's your body language like? Are you open to receiving that feedback? And as I said, video calls, if you can't do face-to-face, really are the best. An email really can sometimes muddy the waters. For me personally, I don't take an email very well because I don't understand the tone. So for me, I would rather see someone and hear someone to understand the message as well. Think about those responses you might get as well. So really preparing yourself and showing that empathy really is key. And that can help by being clear, concise. Think about your delivery when you are delivering that message, but really listen to understand. And the key is to expand. And if you think back to the video where we're having those questions, it's that two-way conversation. I think that really is the key thing. We want to have that two-way communication. Now, if we take all these points into consideration, it really can help to deliver that feedback properly. Make a conscious choice as well to give and receive feedback on a regular basis. It does become easier if you do it regularly, and it will become a habit. And it really is a powerful means for someone for their own personal development or to make that positive change. So let's have a look at the common mistakes now that normally are made.
Yeah, thanks, Arlene, and some good considerations. But it'd be remiss of us if we don't look at some common mistakes that most of us have probably fallen foul of, or also been a victim to. And there's two that I want to particularly look at, but then I want to look at a model that can help us to overcome that. So the first one I want to look at is probably the top of the chart, is the use of but. So let's just use three quick examples. So first off, let's bring up the first example, which is the praise. You've done a great job of keeping the office organized, but I noticed that the printer needs more paper. Or the second one, you handled that customer's question well, but you didn't tell her about any of our other services. And then a final example, hopefully we're landing the message here, but you submitted your monthly report on time, but I noticed a couple of errors in it. Now, rhetorical question, we don't need to answer this one in the chat, but I will bring you in for the next one. How many of you have either made this mistake or been victims of it? The chances are a lot of us on this call, a high percentage, if not all of us at any given point. And it's probably the most common feedback mistake people make. And we saw from the video earlier, there is reasons behind that. But what I want to know is, why do you feel people rely on the word but when delivering this type of feedback? What's the reason? Type into the chat why we use the word but so often when giving feedback. Let's see what people come up with here. Yeah, Megan, it could be the fact that you're backtracking on what you've said. Digging into that a little bit deeper, what's the reason for us backtracking on what we've said? Yeah, it's defending our ideas, isn't it, Rana? I like that. Yeah, it softens the blow, as Sunshine and Rachel says. Yeah, worried about being too direct method. Yeah, that's the thing. We don't want to offend the individual. We don't have the confidence just to say what could be done better. Yeah, Angela, we hide behind that. Yeah, it's uncomfortable giving criticism, isn't it? You don't. And as well, we've got this relationship. Well, that's really nice, actually. Someone has just given a little thumbs up. Do feel free to do that, by the way. Use your emoji reactions in the chat if you agree with any points that the people on this chat are giving as well. It shows interaction, which I really do like and encourage within any session. Another reason, and this is something that I feel guilty of quite a lot, is that I'm a people person and I don't want that person to dislike me. So, and I'm afraid that they're going to become emotional or become defensive. So we interject that but in it. But consider this, either if you have delivered feedback with but or received feedback with but, what's the impact of interjecting but? What's the impact on that feedback? Let's think about that now as well. What are the impacts, and why is this, well, essentially, why is this a mistake? Let's consider that for a short while. Yeah, exactly, Angela. The receiver will ignore the first part of the feedback. It's almost softening the blow, isn't it? As we've said beforehand, people focus on the but. Yeah, you know it in a conversation, not just with feedback. Someone's saying something, rah, 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 and then you're just waiting for them to go, but, and then you know the truth is going to come out. And yeah, it deflects from the positive starts, doesn't it? It muddies the water. Yeah, it cancels out what was mentioned earlier. So it's impossible for the recipient to take to heart the positive, because now that, okay, yeah, what's coming next then? And it gives rise to that cynicism, doesn't it? Because the recipient then starts to think, okay, yeah, it's very hard to believe what you're saying here because I know that you're going to caveat it with a but. And yeah, exactly that. It's that positive start. It does deflect from it. And this is often a mistake that we fall foul of. So if there's a takeaway here, try to take away the word but, and we're going to look at ways to avoid this mistake with a simple process and also separating the two. But now I also want to look at another common mistake, and to do this I want to run an experiment. So let's look at mistake 2 now, and feel free to close your eyes. Okay, let's run this experiment. Imagine you are in the role of a sales associate who sells computers in a retail store. Okay, you've just completed the sale of a laptop to a customer, and now your manager is going to come over and give you some feedback. So close your eyes, listen in, and then we'll reflect on it afterwards.
That interaction with the customer went really well, and you helped her understand what she needed to look for in a laptop. Did you notice that the sales process slowed down when you were doing the paperwork though? When you don't keep the paperwork organised and you have to shuffle back and forth between it and the computer screen, it gives the impression that you're disorganised. I'm glad you're focusing on helping our customers understand the technical aspects of buying a computer. That builds their confidence in us. Keep up the good work.
Okay, and for those with eager ears, you'll notice that that was our digital director, Westy. Shout out to Westy. So I want to just ask you a few questions to debrief that, and again, just reflection piece on this. How did you feel about receiving that feedback? Don't have to type in the chat, just reflect. Was there any part of the feedback you didn't believe? And if you were in that position, how motivated are you actually to change your paper shuffling ways? Now, if we bring up mistake 2, if we bring up the actual text on this, and what we can see is, and there's many names for this, we're going to call it mistake 2 sandwich technique. Yes, there are other names. And yeah, Ramo, very political. We're going to call it the sandwich technique. This is where we take 2 bits of positive feedback, the behavior we want the person to continue, and we then sandwich in that corrective feedback, the one that we want people to change. But it's confusing. It muddies the message. It's almost what was being referred to in the video earlier by Leanne about the blur words. So a good rule of thumb is to focus only on one kind of feedback at a time. Because if it is not specific and clear and we're focusing on one part, it confuses the recipient, but also long term, you're not going to build a relationship with that individual who's given that feedback because you don't know if it's completely sincere. And so to help us with that, let's separate the 2 first and foremost. And the 2 that I want to look at is motivational and developmental. So we've got 2 different types. And this, if we can start getting into our head that we've got 2 different types, then hopefully we can start to overcome these mistakes that we often fall foul of. So we need to be clear which type we're trying to give. Because we often pick on the little things that people are doing wrong and forget to give that positive motivational feedback. However, caveat there, if we only ever give motivational feedback or that positive feedback, we're going to get motivated individuals in the short term, but without the knowledge or the understanding of how they can develop. And long term, the feedback carries less weight because it becomes the norm and it loses its motivational impact. And also, for those that have just received just motivational feedback, often in the back of your mind, you're asking, yeah, but what more could I do? What could I change? How could I develop? And you actually become quite resentful of just receiving that. You want to know what you want to do well. On the flip side, if we only give the developmental feedback, then individuals are going to feel like you're always on their case. You're only ever going to give them feedback when they've done something wrong or it's not to the standard of which you want. And in fact, according to research from the Harvard Business Review, if we want people to take on board the developmental feedback, we need to give motivational feedback much more often than developmental. Actually, the ideal ratio is 5-to-1. So we want to see a 5-to-1 split. That's quite challenging. And maybe that's not where we're at the moment, but work towards it, even if we're looking towards a 3-to-1 at the moment. Because by regularly recognizing when people do things well, we can then open the door to giving the developmental feedback when it matters and hopefully lead to a change in behavior. And because we're giving that motivational, they're hopefully going to be more inclined to listen and be less defensive when that developmental feedback comes, because they know that you've got their best interest at heart. So it's vital that we give both. Developmental, yes, but also lots and lots of good motivational feedback. And maybe a takeaway for you today is to think about, okay, is there anyone in my stakeholder map that I could just give some motivational feedback that I haven't given before, something that they do that just is really, really useful to me, but haven't let them know. Go away and think about that and start changing that balance of 5-to-1. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we understand the reason for feedback. I think that's the important part here, because too often, as it says in the quote here from the New York Times, too often we feel that feedback is about making people feel better, but actually it's about helping them to do better. It's about unlocking their potential. It's about performing at higher levels. It's about collaboration. It's about growth and pushing an organization or business forward. And it doesn't mean that we're unempathetic or insensitive to the ego issues that was mentioned earlier in the chat. Of course not. These can obviously surface in feedback conversation because there is that vulnerability piece there. But what it does mean is if we do a good job of giving feedback, then hopefully people are more receptive to it, and we create that feedback culture, which we're going to look at briefly towards the end of today's session. And yeah, unfortunately, we don't always achieve this. As mentioned in the video, the Gallup survey found that only 26% of people felt the feedback they received helped to improve their work. So we need to look at how we can change this. And I'm hopefully going to introduce a simple model that goes alongside that 4-part formula that will help us to deliver both developmental and motivational feedback. And that model is the AID model. So I want to bring that up now, but I want to use 2 examples. So yes, I'm starting with developmental, but we're also going to bring in a slide which shows motivational as well. So just looking at each of these points, we've got action, impact, and do, the AID model, which can be used for any type of feedback. Now, the action, that's where we list examples of the positive or negative behaviors or actions that we noticed. And it's important to speak in the first person using I statements. So in this example, we're going back to Jeff from the earlier examples, and we would say, Jeff, I noticed that the sales process slowed down when you were doing the paperwork. Were you aware of this? Now, what you could even do before bringing in this is you could start with that micro yes. Hey Jeff, are you okay to talk about that interaction with the customer just then? That micro yes can then lead way to AID. Next is impact. Now, impact is listing the specific impacts that on the customer, on staff around them, on the brand, on the outcomes. So in this instance, you could say, I felt that you weren't paying your full attention to the customer when you had to shuffle back and forth. I felt that it gives the impression that you're disorganized. Again, lots of I statements in the first person. The final part of AID, so we looked at action, we looked at impact. We're now going to look at do, which is identifying desired outcomes, agreed changes in behaviors or actions. And this, for me, exactly as mentioned in the video, is a 2-way conversation. So if possible, let's start it with a question. And in this instance, we could say, I wonder if we can talk about ways to avoid that next time. And the reason why we do this is because we're looking forward, exactly as Arlene mentioned, and we're getting buy-in from the individual. They're hopefully going to be more committed to what we're hoping to improve on. Remember, the importance of feedback is to help them to do better. But if they're coming up with the ideas, then they're doing the hard work for you rather than suggesting what they can do. And yes, sometimes we do need to give that suggestion if they can't see what needs to be improved. But wherever possible, make it 2-way. And just think for a moment about how you would feel receiving this feedback. Hopefully it's clear. Hopefully it's concise. Hopefully it's given specific tasks, takeaways that the individual can work on. But that's not all, because as I mentioned, we can also use it in a motivational way. So let's just bring that up and flip the example slightly and look at how AID can be used in a motivational way. Because let's say that Jeff has done a good job. Now, we already said that we want to do the 5-to-1. So let's notice Jeff. So Jeff, I noticed that you're focusing on helping our customers with buying a computer. Now, impact, exactly the same as before. We're going to focus on that, and we're going to use a lot of first person I statements. I was really impressed at your knowledge and your ability to help the customer understand the technical aspects. I felt that will build their confidence in the brand. Now, it's not just saying I was really impressed with the knowledge. You're telling them why you're impressed with it. You're telling them about what makes a difference. And the do can quite simply be, yeah, keep up the great work. You know, really impressed, keep up the great work. And I think this model is even more important when we are remotely based. Because when we are behind a screen rather than shoulder to shoulder with people, we very rarely give the opportunity to give people feedback unless we go out of our way to do so. So it's important to recognize people when they are doing something well, rather than them second guessing, thinking, was that well received? Did I do a good job? Not sure. Whereas if you give this motivational feedback, then they're going to dial that up, which again is going to drive performance. It's going to push the business on. And if you're in a managerial position, it's going to make your life a lot easier. Okay, so we've covered the feedback model. Let's now look at how we should go about receiving feedback. Arlene, I'm going to hand back over to you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I do agree with you when you talk about the AID model. I think you might not get it right first time, and it's been aware of that. I think it's better to give some feedback than no feedback. So I think learning and practicing that AID model really helped me just to be able to deliver that clear and concise feedback as well. So let's look at how we receive feedback then. So Rich, could you launch the poll for me here? So what I'd like you to think about is, where could you obtain feedback within your network? Now, I think Rich already kind of alluded to that earlier on. So really what I want you to do is think about, where could you get that feedback from within your network? So you'll just need to keep an eye on it, Rich, because it's disappeared from my screen.
Yeah, we've got good interaction so far. So yeah, click all that apply. And also, if there's others that aren't on that and you've already finished the poll, feel free to share best practice in the chat as well. Absolutely.
I think it's thinking outside the box slightly as well, Rich, isn't it? You might not know, you might not have thought about that till now, but it maybe gives you that opportunity to think about, where could you actually go? Who could you ask? And if the answer isn't there, please pop it in the chat. It'd be good to hear.
Yeah, no, I'll give a few more moments and then reveal, and it's good to see what people are saying. I mean, 6 people have said somewhere else, so those six are just teasing us and not sharing where. They could if they're not putting it in the chat. I'm going to end the poll and share it, and then hopefully you can debrief that, Arlene. So if you can't see it, I'll just let you know how the percentage breakdowns.
Yeah, that would be great.
Most people, 97% of people that interacted said your manager, which is often the case, isn't it? We often go hierarchical and look for that feedback, but it's good to see that a high percentage said colleagues.
Yep.
Which is that 360 piece. Stakeholders, which I love, which is going outside maybe of that organizational structure. It could be the people that you're working with outside of the business. Is 69%. Cross-functional teams, which is 67%, and then somewhere else 7 people suggested that.
Right. No, and we need to know where these are from. Where's the somewhere else? That would be nice to hear. I'd try to think of where the somewhere else could be, possibly partner, probably, maybe. It's always good to get feedback. But I think, yeah, it just shows you the wide range. And I think if we think back to that video with Leanne Reiniger, for this reason, really, we want to be asking for that feedback. So remember that pool, rather than waiting for it to be given to us. So we don't want to have that kind of push. So as much as possible as we can, really ask for that feedback every day. Don't wait till the end of that project or task. You've all said quite a lot of you are working in cross-function teams. So set it up at the beginning. When are we going to look at giving each other feedback? How are we going to work through the process? And I think it could just be something as simple as, how did I come across in that meeting? How was it with that client? How was that interaction? Really focus on what it is you want to get better at. Think back to that growth mindset. What we're going to change, what we're going to improve on moving forward. And the more we ask, the more we learn, and the more we get comfortable and used to giving and receiving that feedback as well. And it makes it more comfortable. And then we all start to share that feedback. And really that's when we create that feedback culture. And that's ultimately what we're looking for. I don't think they're wanting to share, Rich. Those 7 not hearing.
For another time. I like the suggestion on the partner as well. That's good. That's really good.
So what we want to do is we've looked at that growth mindset and where we could obtain that feedback, but let's look at how we receive feedback using 3 simple steps. So keep it really easy and simple. So first of all, think about that receive. So when you do receive that feedback, I think pause for a moment really works. Sometimes it's automatically to be quite defensive, but really that's quite natural. Just remember yourself, be gentle with yourself, and just remember their intention is good. Say thank you, be grateful that you're going to get that feedback, and appreciate the honesty they're giving you as well. Then think about that greatness. So remember, we're all learning, we're all growing. That person really wants to help us grow. So think about what can you learn from this feedback. Then go back to those ask questions. Get curious. Can you give me an example? What can I improve on? Ask for more detail. Really make it that two-way conversation. Again, just be considerate of how your body language is and your tone. Be curious and smile. That really does set the tone for the conversation and supports that open conversation and body language as well. Then we want to take action. So really reflect on what you could improve on and check in with them. How could I improve? What do you think? What could I do next? And really take some time to reflect on that feedback. Our automatic reaction sometimes is just to jump in, but really just take the information in and then go back to the person. Really think about what actions might you take, what might you do differently, and then revisit it. Go back to that person and ask them if they've noticed any changes. Ask for their opinion as well. Shows that you really do value that as well. Now, the more this is an everyday habit, then we will be able to create that feedback culture. And ultimately, that's what we're looking to aim for, is being able to give and receive that feedback freely. So before we finish, let's just look briefly at how we start to create that culture that both offers and desires that feedback. Now, our ultimate aim should be to create that feedback culture across the whole team, whether that be internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, and really create that environment where it's continuous and it's given and embraced by all. So what I'd like to ask you in the chat now is, what things can we do to receive? So think about that culture of receiving feedback. What things can we do to create this culture? So think about that receiving feedback. What things can we do first of all? Thanks, Rich. That's very helpful. Rich has just popped the question in the chat for you. So think about what things we can do to create that receiving culture. Yeah, Joe, absolutely. Putting some time, you know that you're going to give that person some feedback, and having that time set aside. There's no room for, sorry, I've not got time. It really does make a difference. And it shows that person that you do care about their development as well. Yeah, Rana, being open-minded, honest. I love that flexible word. Yeah, absolutely. Being open, you don't know how it's going to be taken. Yeah, to be very clear. Yeah, I love that. Speaking the truth. There is no point sugarcoating it, as they say. It is really important that you're honest with that person. Absolutely. Having those right intentions and that mindset, Alana. Yeah, encouraging it, Megan. Absolutely. And then you will see, as Jadama says, things will move in the right direction as well. So lots of things, just to add to what you've already said. And I think the key thing is intention really is everything. Often if we react defensively or we worry about upsetting the receiver, then it really is remembering that intention is at the heart of things. And it's making sure that we know sometimes it might be difficult to hear, but really it's thinking about that long-term relationship, that collaboration, being kind, and really give them some examples so that you're really clear in what the feedback is. And I think that you've all pretty much alluded to that as well. Ask ahead of time. Yeah, as Sarah said, it's like you're reading what's coming next. Yeah, make sure that you're comfortable, that open environment as well, and really give the person some time to consider the responses as well. So if it makes it easier for them, really think about, instead of saying, please give me some feedback, it could be you could say, I'm really working on my presentation skills. I would really appreciate if you could watch me and give me some feedback. And really look for things that you see that I could do better or improve on. And really accept that feedback gracefully. Ask questions, be inquisitive. And really, if you don't understand the feedback someone's given you, then ask, talk about it, because that's how we do get to move forward as well. So what about giving feedback then? What things do we have there? Yeah, I love that, Angela, that you value their opinions, and that really does create that relationship between two people, doesn't it? That you actually value it and appreciate it. So how do we create that culture of the giving then? What things can we do? Yeah, absolutely, Megan. You want to give it as soon as you possibly can. If you leave it, it almost seems like you don't have that person's best interest at heart. So I think it's about how you give that feedback straight away. Yeah, do it regularly, Sunshine, as you said. Think about more that pull rather than push. Yeah, what is the objective? What's the importance? Why are we giving that feedback? Really, it's been transparent and open for me, really encouraging each other. Talk about the right approach as well. Give that feedback freely and really encourage that feedback culture. The more we do it, the more comfortable we get with giving and receiving. And as we said there as well, giving that feedback in the moment, don't wait to be asked. And I think telling somebody really does increase its effectiveness, and it's more likely to be well received as well. I like that. I feel share success stories where it's led to positive outcomes. Yeah, absolutely. Revisit it. What went well? What's changed? What behaviour's changed? What's moved forward? I love that. Yeah, I like that. See that definitely. I see feedback as a gift. It's an opportunity to do better, and yeah, absolutely having that 360 feedback, encouraging it. It really does make that open culture that we all want to create. And the key element is performance and growth for all of us as individuals, but also as our companies. It's a responsibility to give our colleagues and improve that overall performance by giving regular feedback. People want that regular feedback. So I can't believe we're near the end already, Rich. It's like the hour just flies by, doesn't it? So what I'd like to hear before we just kind of close off today's session and summarise, I'd like you to think about really what's the one thing that you found useful today, or what you're going to change, what you're going to do differently. Because the idea of feedback is change, growing, moving forward. What are we going to do differently? And really think about it. It could just be one thing, but that one thing could make a huge difference. Now, as you're thinking about that, just to kind of recap on today, Rich started off with that growth mindset. Anything that you want to add to that, Rich, about that growth mindset and why it's so important?
No, because I'm going to let you add that in for the plug for the next webinar, I feel. But yeah, I feel it's so important. And I like what someone said as well. Growth mindset coupled with a positive mindset is only going to lead to improvement, isn't it? Absolutely.
Definitely. Having that plan, really avoiding that feedback sandwich, that but really grates in me. And I think that's probably one of my things I learned quite early on. Yeah, people start off really well, then the but comes in and yeah, you forget everything. Bethan's saying that micro yes, a fantastic video. So I will share that with you in the chat. If I can spell properly. So for me, that's a great video. If you can watch it back, I would really recommend. I found that one really useful. Look at how we practice. I really would say giving it feedback as a gift, and then thinking about how we create that feedback culture. Yeah, the one I said there as well. Do more, practice. As Angela said, plan, have enough time, be honest. Because I think people want you to be honest. Absolutely. So while you're thinking and popping in your kind of key learns from the session today, just we're more than happy to take some questions as well. So just before we finish off, I'll let you know a bit about the next webinar we're going to be doing. So as Rich already said, this is our last one of the year, which has been fantastic. I think that they're all really useful, and I think it's great to get to see so many different people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different organisations, and I think that's what I enjoy, and I know Rich does as well. But next year, we're going to continue with these webinars, and really the first one we'll be doing is on the 28th of February. So Westy and myself, and Rich has put the link in the chat for you there as well. So we'll delve into what's involved in cultivating that belief in yourself. And I think that's the key thing. You need to have that belief in yourself. Look at how we can take tangible actions, change, shift that mindset, and really look at the effort, personal growth, how we learn and continue to learn, and really embrace those challenges, step outside your comfort zone, but look at how we build that resilience. And really, growth mindset is a continual journey, and one I'm sure that we'll look at next year. So all that remains for us to say is thank you so much. It's been great to have you all on board. And in the tradition of feedback, me and Rich would love to hear your thoughts. So I will pop the link in the chat as well. So there is a couple of QR codes there where you can follow us, give us a follow, or you can click and give us some feedback. Again, creating that culture of given and received would be much appreciated. And if you do have any questions, Rich and myself are more than happy to stay on and answer those questions as well.